Thanks everybody for being here. I must say, as a first timer in Indianapolis, very impressed with what we've seen and taken in so far. I think this is a session that is really, really critical. It's been at the forefront of a lot of discussions, both on the policy and private sector front, and I'm thrilled to be here. Jason Dodier, I'll be moderating this session with Paige Crahan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Grain Ecosystem. And at Grain, we're really focused on a big moonshot of accelerating carbon sequestration, waste to value, waste to energy. And just to give a fast opening on moonshots from my perspective, I spent a lot of my career working internationally, particularly on access to energy programs across Middle East, Africa, and Europe, working on Schneider Electric's access to energy program. And I also got to lead one of the largest microgrid projects in the United States at JFK Terminal 1, 11.34 megawatts of solar. And really, Grain came out of the Schneider Electric Innovation Global Program. So we competed against about 250 other teams internationally, and we looked at the 10 gigaton a year removal ecosystem, waste to value ecosystem, and carbon sequestration ecosystem, and that was really the thesis and the ethos. And if you're gonna predict the future, the best way to do it is to invent it. And really, we're gonna go into an exciting topic today. Paige, maybe to kick off, tell us a little bit about your perspective on what a moonshot is, and from the lens of the relay race, which I love, and I've seen your past talks, which is very exciting.
I would love to talk about the relay race, and thanks for joining us. It's wonderful to be here. I actually am from just a few hundred miles to the east, to the west. Am I pointing the right way? We don't know. I'm from Iowa, west, thank you. Okay, and it's really great to be back in the Midwest. I even saw some lightning bugs, I think, last night. So I am gonna use a few slides just to help ground us in how we think about moonshots. I am the general manager of a project we call Tapestry, which is a moonshot for the electric grid that is being built inside of X, the Moonshot factory. And X is Alphabet, which is Google's parent company. It's our innovation lab. And our job at X is to invent and launch breakthrough technologies that will make the world a radically better place. And that is a wonderful mission to wake up to every morning, and is really inspired by the moonshot idea in the 1960s of JFK. How do we put people on the moon? And how do we do that? And imagine in 1960s when he's issuing this challenge, there's no spacesuits, there's no internet. We're still figuring out basic things where today we might understand more from SpaceX and others. But really, if you think about having someone issue this challenge in 1960, you know you have to be radical. You know you have to think about things that don't exist at all to achieve these challenges, which requires a lot of collaboration. And so what we think about, how do we connect what a moonshot might look like with the real world? Some things that you may be familiar with that have come out of X. We're about a 14-year-old effort from inside the Google factory. Waymo, which is the self-driving car that you may be familiar with, was an idea, just a glimmer in the team's eye about 14 years ago. And now, and you can imagine sort of proposing the idea, I think we should build a car that drives itself, doesn't need a driver. And that's laughable. 14 years ago, how would that work? And today, in many cities in the US, San Francisco and Phoenix and others, you can pull out your phone and order a Waymo and it will drive you to where you need to go with no one in the front seat. And that is how you get big transformational things done. We also have done a really incredible drone delivery program, which is on 3 continents and delivers goods to folks autonomously, including medicine and really important things that need to be delivered in a timely fashion. And then finally, Brain came out of X, the Moonshot factory, which was really created some of the foundational technology that's part of the AI revolution today and is being used all around. And I hope, has anyone heard the word AI yet? You have. Okay, good. This is an innovation conference. We're in the right place. So this is how some of the things that we've built, and again, they take time and partnership. When we're thinking about moonshots and the ingredients, and I'm really hoping that folks that are listening today take some of these ideas and lessons and apply them to your own work. So when we define what is a moonshot and are you working on something that fits here, we first say, is there a huge problem that if you solve it, you improve the lives of millions or billions of people? Has to be big enough to really inspire impact. Number 2, is there a radical solution? Emphasis on the word radical. If it's already kind of being worked on and others are doing it, it's not radical. It's still good work, but it's not radical. And then the third component is there a breakthrough technology that is just on the cusp of being useful, available, and real? And if it were to become, practical and deliverable, it would unlock that radical solution that would solve the problem. So this is how we think about Moonshot, the definition of a moonshot at X. And really, really importantly, hopefully for all of us, it is all rooted in the fact that any moonshot is a relay race. And that was a notion even inspired before the Summer Olympics, although lovely to watch the relay races this summer. I think knowing that we need to work with, policy, innovators, customers, public, private, innovation, R&D, academics, that is really how you create moonshots, is in a collaborative environment, and it's a key ingredient of building things that are transformational.
Thanks for that, Paige. And let's stick on the theme of radical innovation. So one of my favorite sayings, we've got to make reversible decisions quick and irreversible decisions deliberately. Doesn't matter what role you are, you're a startup, big corporate, federal enterprise. We've seen some of the discussions yesterday and in a couple of the happy hours talking about some of the decision making that even made radical possible. And they even talked about radical 10.0, which is very exciting. But part of that is everything is an odds game. How do you shift the odds in your favor? How do you avoid sunk cost fallacy? How do you think about bringing these teams together and doubling down on something in that irreversible way with a lot of confidence? So if you can walk the audience through that from the perspective of the Moonshot and Tapestry, I think that would be very welcome.
It is such an important reminder that when you're innovating, by definition, you are doing something that has not been done before. And so you need to know when to stop, when to pivot, and when to double down. You want to use your personal resources and your team's resources most effectively in the spirit of innovation. And I think there are two things that I would point to that are really helpful and that we think about at X a lot. One is if you fall in love with the problem you're trying to solve, not the solution that you believe to solve that problem, it becomes really, it's an unlock to be able to pivot or sunset your idea and go to something else, to remove yourself from the sunk cost fallacy. Are there any engineers in the audience, by the way? I love engineers. I love you. Bless you. Many of the folks on my team who are engineers, and all of us, but specifically I see this with our engineering friends, like really fall in love with the idea. They've got this vision. They just know if they do it, if it does this and then that, and well, it almost worked, but if I try this one more thing, and you can probably do that for years, right? A little more of this, a little more of that. But if you allow yourself to connect your solution, the thing you're so passionate about, your approach, that is just trying to solve a problem. And if every day you're saying to yourself, is there a better way to solve my problem? Can I get there faster? Instead of proving that my solution was the solution, you really allow yourself to put some of your ideas, to rest them, come back to them later and try something new. I think this notion of falling in love with the problem as opposed to your solution is one of the most important unlocks in innovation. There are projects at X that were, a team said, all right, we want to make zero carbon fuel for automobiles, and we think we can use seawater. And they worked for years about seawater, and they realized the techno-economics weren't there, and then they immediately pivoted to new fuels. It wasn't, we can't do this, it was, is there a different way to do this? And I think that's a really important way for us to think about innovation, managing our resources, channeling the passion that we have for what we're trying to solve, but making sure that when we see something that maybe we don't need to work 2, 4, 7 months, on that path, I think it's okay to let that rest. We also use this concept of moonshot compost. So just like in our garden, the things that we don't use, they're still valuable, right? They fertilize other ideas. They're the beginning of something new. And some of our most meaningful innovations have actually come from that compost, meaning it's a technical idea that it didn't solve the problem that was originally designed, but then someone else came along and said, well, that's really interesting. Have you ever applied it over here? And I think there's the ability to really cross-pollinate, and again, this goes into the relay race. One of the things that's really beautiful about working inside of X is you have a physicist and a biologist and an electrical engineer all having lunch together, and sort of some of the ideas that may be nonlinear and applications really are great unlocks. So I think this is something that when we think about avoiding the sunk cost fallacy, really making sure that we're committed to the innovation and the problem we're trying to solve. And then once you have set up a metric, a parameter that would be an unlock. There's $1 per, I'm in energy, so $1 per watt with a carbon score. If I could get to that, that would transform this industry. And we sort of relentlessly go to that. And once you get there, you double down on it, right? You put some of your other folks that are working on things that might not be there yet, and you sort of say, that's it, it's working, let's get there. And you bring in folks to help, right? So those are a few things that I really think are important in terms of innovating in a nimble way and committing resources, whether it's unreversible and you've done the work and you're not going to use it, but you can apply it elsewhere, that's okay. Compost is good, or something you want to double down on.
And Paige, I think everybody is in violent agreement here. We want to avoid and try to get in front of the tragedy of the common situation. And we can't just stand on the sidelines. You need leadership, you need big bets, and that's where Moonshot has really stood out. And the topic du jour really is something that I like to say, courage is knowing what not to fear. Mm-hmm. A lot of people fear the discussion around the grid. This is one of the greatest feats of mankind in the 20th century. I think it's probably coming on the 130th birthday of the grid. And when you look at some of the things that have happened in just the last year and a half, we've seen 48,000 individuals lose power with PG&E. Mm-hmm. We've seen statistics around 30% of transmission lines, 60% of distribution lines are potentially in the US at end of life. One of the reasons we created Alpha Structure, which was a joint venture between the Carlyle Group on the capital side and Schneider on the technology side, was to try to inject capital to do more microgrid projects. Montgomery County, Maryland, bringing 70 clean buses online, certainly Terminal 1 and other things. What I'd like to start with on your side is, can you share a couple of use cases, particularly related to something close at home here in Indianapolis and certainly the work in Chile, just to start to give us a window into the work being done, and then we'll dig in deeper on some of the tools within Moonshot that can help us with that predictive maintenance to support what we're seeing with the grid. Yeah,
I am a huge grid nerd, so we'll try to keep it sort of palatable. But Tapestry is the Moonshot that I lead, which is our Moonshot for the electric grid. And one of the things that I love is, if you step all the way back and you think about energy, the electric grid itself, which is 130 years old or so, it is the largest thing that mankind has ever done. The biggest thing that we created, the most complicated, the most expensive, from the inverters that we use to the large, massive scale energy delivery. It is the biggest machine we've ever built. And we run it the same way it was designed 130 years ago. Imagine that. Right? So literally imagine 130 years ago, the inception of this idea. At that time, the way we get around is horse and buggy. Today, you might drive a Tesla. Can you imagine using the same technology today? We have totally transformed the way we get from A to B. Communication. We were using telegrams 130 years ago. There's not a person in this room that doesn't have a phone in their pocket that can do 10,000 things, including being a phone. And then but the grid is the same. The exact same way we originally conceived of delivering energy, centrally generate it in a big machine that burns things, ship the power to where it's used, and then use it, unchanged, right? That's the same way we run the energy system. But what has happened in 130 years in the energy system? Everything. The most beautiful innovation, some of the most amazing things that have come to bear from all around the world. We're electrifying our transportation. Whether that's cars, buses, there's a Cybertruck right behind us. So they're everywhere, right? 3 wheels, 2 wheels, all around the world. We've got rooftop solar. People are generating their own energy that is zero carbon at their house. That's totally transformational, creating a bi-directional grid never conceived of 130 years ago. And we're completely shifting the way we generate energy to be driven by weather-based generation. Instead of burning something that we can predict, we're using low carbon weather, wind, solar, and otherwise. These are amazing innovations that we are shoving onto a system that's still running from the era of horse and buggies. So that is a place that we need immediate and urgent innovation and moonshot thinking in my mind. Energy is the lifeblood of much of our community. It's health and safety. It's how we run our economies. So we need to do better. If you think about, as Jason pointed out, what's happening in our energy today, we don't think about it all the time. Well, we pay more than we used to. Our power quality has gone down. We have more outages now than we did 20 years ago. And we emit 25% of the global emissions from our grid. So we're spewing emissions, paying more for poorer quality energy. That's really not going to work for us. So we do need to come together. In my mind, this is a perfect moonshot because we're going to need all different stakeholders to come together to work on this with urgency. And that's where Tapestry comes in. You know, one of the very first things when I started out, I was originally a renewable energy developer and watched, you know, from 2007, 2008, in the very early days where I was at farmers markets explaining how solar energy worked. And now we see there is more renewable energy waiting to get connected to the US grid. 90% of all the energy waiting to get connected to the US grid today is renewable energy, wind and solar. And the amount that is waiting in the queue to be approved exceeds what we use as a country in a year. Ready to be plugged in, ready to go. So we have the technology, we have the goodwill, we have the financing. Why aren't we getting it done? And that's really what Tapestry's been thinking about a lot. And I think it's really important for us, especially in you know, the Midwest and everywhere in the world, to connect reliable energy with health and safety. So one of the very first things that Tapestry did was to start working with one of my favorite jokes, which I don't know if anyone on my team laughs at, but I like to tell jokes. When the Waymo team started working at X, you know, I always said it must have been easy. You sort of took a golf cart and you slapped some sensors on it and you drove around the parking lot and then you moved from there. Well, the electric grid, I need a partner. I don't have a grid to work with, to practice on. So the very first thing we needed to do in our relay race for Tapestry was to find innovation partners who had energy systems and grids that were willing to do things differently, that were willing to work with us on true moonshots. And that's not for everybody. But one of the very first places that we started working was right here in Indianapolis. The utility that runs the Indianapolis grid was one of the first places that said, we're here to try something different. And it was amazing. So we did some of our first work here, and that was really predicated on the issue they were seeing was aging infrastructure and storms. So if you're from the Midwest, if you're even West or East Coast, everyone's seeing different types of storms, whether it's a hurricane or here in the Midwest, it might be ice, wind, temperature, all of the elements that really create challenges in keeping the infrastructure running. That was where we started. You know, what originally was around, can we get more renewable energy on the grid? They said, actually, our biggest challenge is keeping the lights on for our community. And we said, wow, if we can help keep the lights on for the community and stabilize the grid, make it reliable and resilient, have higher confidence in how it's going to perform, well, that will allow us to keep the lights on at a lower cost, which will also allow us to start injecting some of this innovation that we want to see come online, because we'll be able to manage that stability. So that is really some of the first work we did, and hopefully something that drives inspiration for folks that work in this space. I think the connection, two sides of the coin in energy delivery is reliable, resilient power, keeping the lights on for our communities. It is human health and safety. And on the other side of that coin, we need that energy to be low carbon. We need that energy to work for our communities, to not cause issues. So when we think about this two-sided problem, and in fact, if you really bring the problem to the nexus, you've probably heard this phrase of the energy trilemma. And the energy trilemma notes that we need affordable power for everybody. It's becoming sort of a human right? We need it to be reliable. We need it to keep the lights on in storms. We need to manage our outages. And we need it to be, we call that energy security, and we need it to be low carbon. So when we think about how do we deliver low cost, low carbon, high reliability energy for our communities, that is what Tapestry thinks about as the problem we're trying to solve. And we really are thrilled to be working with partners in the Midwest and in Chile and in South Africa and New Zealand and the UK. We've really thought about this problem that is being experienced globally. It's happening everywhere in the world in different ways. The energy transition is being experienced by everyone. And the way we deliver technology, the way we share insights. One of my favorite parts of having this conversation is we're not competing against each other. You know, the grid in New Zealand isn't competing against the grid in Indianapolis and the grid in California and the grid in South Africa. We all can share insights. We can share, you know, lessons. We can share technologies so that we can speed this process along and really drive innovation in that collaborative way.
Paige, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm fascinated by the two use cases that you highlighted. I think that when you look at what you said, first of all, economics, cheaper, better, faster.
Yep.
A lot of what we've seen with some of the renewable technologies that have come to fruition. A lot of, I'm based in New York City. It was sad that it took the forest fires recently in Canada to have an impact on many people to come up to me and say, hey, I see now the power and value of this work of trying to clean up the grid, trying to improve waste to value, trying to do sequestration. We know the costs on the table. 3 to 5 million have been estimates at 1 mile of burying power lines. We know the predictive power and the nature. Talk through now, this is where it gets really exciting. It builds on the earlier talk around AI, but things like grid aware and being able to work with Chile, which I'll keep hopping on it because that use case of 86% improvement in sequencing and pulling in computational speed and dynamics. Can you talk to us all about two things really? The integration and the use case of AI and machine learning, and then how do we think about the role of integrating renewable technologies, but also looking at microgrids as well in those kind of communities? So it's a multifaceted question that feeds into the trilemma, I think, very nicely, and love to hear your take on that.
So it's a perfect question, and it's almost like we talked about what we wanted to talk about. No, we did. Yeah. It's perfect. So I will share just a little bit about what the two products we're working on and what we're doing in Chile. So my kind of aha to the team was, if we could build Google Maps for electrons, right? Remember, this is a moonshot, and share it with everybody who's working on the network to manage the complexity, to manage these changes, we would transform the industry in a much more rapid pace, right? And that is really what gets us out of bed. How can we get to this nirvana state, and how can we drive change, right, for those innovations, which could be microgrids, which could be new business models, which could be new carbon sequestration, new batteries, new EVs, all the things that are coming online. In good news, I'd like to share with some good news. We have tons of data, which is why the moment is ripe for applying artificial intelligence in the energy system. So this is a control room I was visiting. I've been in a bunch of control rooms around the world, and I was sitting in a simulation in Australia where they have a lot of wildfires, and they were running through what happens in this control room in real time as a training, and in 3 minutes, as the wildfires they were simulating what had happened about a year ago, 10,000 alarms went off for this man to manage, right? So there are two people that are managing that part of the network, and he has to decide 10,000 alarms in 3 minutes to not cause massive multi-day power outages with alerts and alarms, and all these bells are going off, their audio, their visual. So in good news, there's a lot of input. In bad news, we cannot let that be the best that we have to provide solutions to this. No human could decide what they can do here. So that's how we knew we really needed to help in these control rooms, and in Chile is where we started to work. Second, we're still using a ton of manual processes. We have a lot of information, but this middle chart is what people are using to decide how to build out the grid. Single line diagrams. We can do better than that, right? We can do better than that. And then finally, we have beautiful work happening, but they're happening in silos still, right? So we have someone who's working on the distribution network, someone who's working on transmission, someone else who's working on planning, but they don't talk to the team who is doing operating decisions. So if you want to think about new solutions like microgrids, that may be a great point solution for a community that says, okay, you're going to have not enough power for these 4 hours of the day, but you can use the microgrid at that time. But the person who's making operating decisions, if they can't see that that's an option, they'll never say we should invest in that. And it's not because it's not a good idea, it's because they can't see that it's an option. So it's a real expense of having too much information, manual processes, and siloed data. But if you're a problem solver, this is a perfect tee-up for where you want to use things like artificial intelligence, because you have so much rich data from which to derive insights. So that is why this is the right moment to be applying these types of technologies for the electric grid. So we think about taking all this rich data, right? We have Like we use our street view imagery, we use satellites, we use insights from our partners, we use sensor data. We've done a beautiful job starting to digitize this network. Let's bring it together. Let's do more with that information, right? So then what you can do, and I use the analogy of when Google first created search, really what they did was they indexed the internet so that you could get insights that you could make decisions from. You could decide what time was the movie or whatever you were trying to look for. Can we do that same thing for energy? So can we index the world's energy information and help people drive better insights? Like where can I put a battery or a microgrid in a cost-effective way? And so what we've done to get to this point is exactly what Jason's alluded to. We have 2 products that are being used in the world today, and are really looking forward to sort of growing that together. On the left, we think about a tool we call GridAware, and this is really, and on the right, a tool called the Grid Planning Tool, which is being used in Chile, but I'll quickly just touch on what each of these do. So one of the very first things, and I just talked about the challenges with managing physical infrastructure, is understanding and predicting where you're gonna have issues, right? So we know that we can, if you go out with a field service worker who works on the grid and you drive around with them, they will, it's part of their job, look up, oh, that's gonna be an issue. Let me write a note to my boss that I gotta go look at that on Monday. They can see with their eye, they've been so well trained. Why can't we automate that? Why can't we use the tools that we have to let the folks that can intuitively see where there are issues to predict those things? So what we did with GridAware is we took all of the street view imagery we had, we applied machine learning and some algorithms into the cameras to be able to predict and determine not only where the energy grid, where the assets were, is this a pole, is this a transformer, a crossarm, an insulator, but then also to start predicting if there was going to be a failure. And a really good data point for us, and again, to do predictive maintenance. So that is low cost, reducing cost and increasing reliability for the community. And a great data point, which was actually in Michigan, one of our street view cameras was just, was driving down the street on top of a utility vehicle. Our machine learning algorithm found a 6-inch slipped pin from the street distance. So that's about 160 feet from a crossarm that had come through the bottom. So that slipped pin would be definitely not visible to someone who's driving down the road and focusing on where they're headed, but we could identify and then call to attention, hey, you have an issue here. You should go out and repair that, right? So those types of insights are beautiful applications for machine learning. That is where generative AI and deep intelligence can be trained to use visual imagery to predict and get ahead of where there are going to be issues in a cost-effective way, right? So it's a really beautiful way to put this to work. And the second thing that we've been doing, and we've been doing this in Michigan, we're quite active in actually South Africa, in Cape Town, where they have some really challenging grid issues, and we've been applying this in Auckland, New Zealand as well. Interesting data point, we took the same computer vision model that our algorithm was trained on in Michigan, and we applied it to New Zealand, which is a grid that runs at different hertz. Transformers are on the ground instead of in the air, and our algorithm was 84% accurate just off the shelf. So obviously we'll tune that for the geography, but we know these insights can be deployed at scale pretty in an advanced way with a light lift. The AI algorithms are quite powerful. The second use case, which I think is really fun to talk about, is in Chile. So this took, again, on the innovation relay race, there is no way we could have done this without an amazing innovation partner. So we actually had the Minister of Energy of Chile visit us probably 4 years ago, and he said, listen, we have an aggressive carbon goal where we want to decommission our coal plants by 2040. And we want to see if you can build some tools that help us do that a decade early. Can you help us build some tools that we can achieve our goal to decommission coal by 2030? And that's the type of challenge that gets our team, sort of excited and out of bed in the morning. Yes, accelerate a carbon impact by a decade with a real grid, like a real network. And so we've been working with the National Grid of Chile for about 3.5 years to transform the way they plan their future network. And I'll give you a few data points. So right now, everywhere in the world, including Chile, including here in the US, when a planner needs to think about a multi-year kind of, okay, what's this network going to look like 5 years or 10 years from now, they actually have to manually create the scenarios that they want to run. So you need to imagine someone who is highly trained deciding, okay, with the best information I have in my hand, I want to understand what is going to happen to energy demand in this community 5 years from now? What's going to happen to the weather patterns? How much of my energy is going to come from wind or solar, and what's that going to look like? What's going to happen to demand that's driven by weather? Is air conditioning use going to go up? And so we're asking these folks to predict 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, multiple scenarios, permutations of what the future might look like for energy delivery and demand. Then after they manually create all those scenarios for 20 years, then they run simulations of every single node on that grid to see if there will be an issue, if something will break in that scenario, if that amount of wind is going to cause a congestion issue in 2033. These simulations run overnight, and they run one at a time. So if you're asking someone to plan their future grid based on the compute and the amount of time and information they have to limit themselves to looking at 5, 7, or 10 scenarios, because they're going to need to manually create them. Then they're going to need to run them one by one through a simulation that runs through the night. And so what we were able to do to sort of transform the way that Chile is planning their grid now is we first said, that's crazy, this takes way too long. And so we sped up the pace of simulations, not 5x or 10x, but 30x. So now they can run as many simulations as, if they want to think about 15 permutations or 300 permutations, they can do that. They don't have to limit it to 2 or 5 or 10, which of course really increases the confidence in managing that grid, right? Because you've seen many more scenarios, you've run it through its paces. So you can be a bit more bold in your assumptions around perhaps removing a coal plant and replacing it with renewable energy, for example. So we've taken the ability to run their scenarios, we've sped that up 86%. We've taken the number of simulations they can run and we've increased that 30x. And we've introduced a really great use case for artificial intelligence where we are, instead of looking at timestamps that are maybe 3 or 4 times a day, show me the morning, show me the evening, and show me right when people come home from work, when energy starts to be interesting. We're doing 8760, so every hour of every day for the entire year. You don't need to look at 3 timestamps. We can look at everything. And that's really important in a world where people are coming home from work and charging their car at a different time, or their air conditioning is coming on and off. So again, I really want to use this Chile example as I should round trip that story. So now, right now in the month of August, Chile runs their annual planning cycle every year. And they've fully replaced all their tools with Tapestry's tool. And they're running their scenarios 30 times faster, looking at more edge cases. And last year they were curtailing some of their wind generation, not using all of their wind that they've installed. This year we're hoping that they will be able to curtail that at a reduced rate and use more clean energy. So I think that's a really important example of getting really deep in a problem, which you can only do if you have a partner, if you have innovation champions that are there with you. And so by having the Chilean national grid, their energy ministry leaning forward with us, saying we'll try things differently, educating us. We didn't know how to say certain grid phrases in Spanish, and now we do. Sort of all the sorts of things that are required in close innovation. That has unlocked this new way to plan the grid, which they're the first place in the world to do this, and now we're getting calls from all around the world. We want to do that thing that you did in Chile. We want to speed up the way we plan the future of the grid. We want to see if we can accelerate our net zero planning, and that's a really important way for us to drive innovation together.
And scenario analysis, speed and scale is so critical.
Yeah.
But you also have so many things at your disposal that you can dissect to get better. And we talk a lot about compute, data centers. I started my career in the data center business looking at PUE, power usage effectiveness. How do you build effectively? How do we power data centers today and of the future? And hearing you and seeing some of these programs, seeing these statistics, it emboldens a lot of confidence in people that we can get there faster, we can replicate. And it's really knowing where to go, knowing the right use cases and individuals. I think that's really important. And then digitization, bringing transparency, whether it is a type of waste that you have at a processing facility and figuring out how to turn that into RNG or syngas, or figuring out, hey, is a microgrid a good fit? And what elements? Is it geothermal? Is it solar? Is it storage, et cetera? To round out the discussion, obviously the huge topic is also some of the parallel moonshots happening with ARPA-E and with the billions of dollars tied to IRA and other state and federal investments and incentives. How are you thinking about partnering, and how should people in the room think about partnering, and how do you make sense of all of the things? So if you're an institution, a federal institution, leveraging the insights from Moonshot to make the right decisions, because yes, we need to invest a lot of capital to avoid tragedy of the commons, but you also want to reduce some of that waste and do things that can work and move the needle. So provide maybe some insights related to the coexistence of federal and then the moonshots that you have.
I think, again, coming back to moonshots are done by communities. It is a relay race. Doing really complicated things requires the whole constellation of parties. There is a really significant role of research on ARPA-E, and lots of academics and universities are doing beautiful work, and companies and institutions which are critical, and they're doing things that are familiar to them, and they're the right folks to be focusing on these efforts. We need government, we need regulators, we need policy to be part of this, because we all need to be solving this problem together and thinking about the levers that we have. We need customers, we need advocates, we need people to demand that we got to do it better, right? The challenge with innovation is you're disrupting the status quo. That necessitates change. That requires a few people saying, hey, we got to do something different, which is uncomfortable, can be uncomfortable, right? So it's a real call to action for the community to everyone play a role, right? So we have the criticality of taking some of this research and innovation that's happening in the lab and delivering it to the world. So we always tell the team, we got to get out of the lab and into the real world. Cross that transom. What works in a lab with synthetic data in a controlled environment can be a beautiful proof point, but someone's got to take that baton in the relay race and apply it to the real world. Who's going to use it? What are the issues? Is it something like data security and compliance? Okay, let's figure that out. Is it technical? Is it a power flow issue? Is it techno-economic? Is it that the alternative that is, higher carbon is much less expensive? Well, why is that? Have we embodied everything? And so I think the real role for balancing what is happening in a meaningful way at all across the world, and here in the US most specifically with the IRA and some of the other sort of innovation dollars being put to work, is this nexus of research and deployment. And that is what innovation and sort of this moonshot is all going to be about in the energy domain. We've got to build beautiful things. We've got a lot of things we already have that we got to deploy faster, at scale, with transparency and trust, which means we need commercial counterparties to be on the other end, deploying things and making businesses that are going to work for the long run in deploying those technologies. And that's how I really have seen some of the most beautiful and really, this phrase sticks with me of you can only move as fast as your trust, right? The speed of trust is how you drive that change. And so if you create trust and transparency in these different constituents working together, then you have speed, then you have urgency, then you can deliver, right? Because you're not, let me pilot this for 15 years, and then if we meet all these things, we may decide to prove it out. We have got to trust one another, be more transparent with urgency. We got to deliver. We have sort of, time is not our friend with this problem, right? And it's upon us to really, I have little kids, and I think all the time about, I want them to sort of say, Mom helped, right? And I hope we all feel that way. I'm sure whether you have kids or not, we feel like we want to leave a legacy that we really did something. So I think, when we think about the roles of public-private, putting those investments and that information to work, we've got to cross the gap of deployment, which means you have a lot of partnership with community and commercial deployment. But I really think it's been a beautiful, and you see where a lot of the investment is going here in the U.S. are in states where renewable energy hasn't always been a priority, right? So it's part of the economic fiber of the community, and that's really going to be an important part of how we deliver this.
And my closing commentary would really be to that point, communities matter. I spent a little bit of time yesterday with Tove, who's the CEO of Elevate, that did a great job putting this on. And what he said was, look, first of all, I think the stat was 75% of GDP in this state is businesses that have been around 2, 3, 4 years.
Oh, wow.
So what that tells me is leveraging incentive, leveraging innovation, it's an unprecedented time for that right now. Whether it's tax credits. If you are, ag is a big part of a business here. If you have a sugar mill, a lumber mill, a dairy farm, et cetera, how do you tap into incentives from NRCS, from the USDA, from EQIP? How can you, if you're looking to do direct air capture, if you're looking to set up a plant, looking at 45Q and other tax credits? So there is money on the table. The economics are there. There is a lot of times an operational problem. That's how we always like to frame it. You don't always barge in talking about the issue around climate and decarbonization, although the two of us are very, very passionate about that particular topic. A lot of times when I'm going to visit mill owners and farm owners, it's energy security. How can you leverage that waste to drive energy security? But how do you put yourself in a position to be successful? How do you leverage digital tools to understand what can I do with this waste? Whether it is a manure type of a waste, it's a bagasse, et cetera. What's the gasification, the pyrolysis, the RNG components, making it a reality and building businesses from generation to generation. I think that's where Moonshot's really inspired the next generation. I think what makes me fearful a little bit is getting the next generation into the trades, getting the next generation into the energy space in general, and also next generation farms and mills and these institutions that states like Indiana are so dependent on today. So I think we've got to dream big. You've got to think about art of the possible all the time. But hopefully this discussion today opened some eyes, gave some really nice insights. I know every time I talk to you, Paige, it inspires me personally to want to do more as an entrepreneur and to want to build. And hopefully many people in the audience today that either they had those bold ideas, will go forward and execute on those bold ideas, or they will find those unique partnerships in their business to go and really steady the path ahead. So I want to thank everybody immensely. I know this is a big space, so I want to give ample opportunity to get to the next space. But really, Paige, thanks to you for being here and sharing a lot and bringing that even more transparency to the great work at Moonshot Next.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. And I want to echo your challenge to everyone. I hope there's something percolating in your mind that you're either already working on, that you're going to go sort of run after with renewed excitement, or something that you've been thinking about for a while. It is a really important moment in time, and we need all of us to do this work. So thank you for being here. I hope you have a wonderful summit. Go be innovative. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.